Dave Bleakney from the Canadian Union of Postal Workers. I'm an executive vice president for our national union. We have just around 50,000 members from coast to coast to coast.
In the United States, there have been big efforts to privatize the postal offices. Staples, there was a campaign by American Postal Workers Union, APW, to stop that. What is the struggle in Canada around privatization of the post offices?
Yeah, so privatization right now appears to be essentially off the table, and that's what the government has stated as well, but it wasn't easy getting there. There's been privatization, open calls for privatization by previous governments, as well as a sort of privatization by stealth. Now, how does that work? Well, the previous government intended to eliminate the pensions of workers and also eliminate door-to-door delivery. Why? Well, because private investors didn't want to pay to deliver to the door. It's not particularly cost-effective, and they didn't want to pick up and be responsible for those pensions. So if they get those two little things out of the way, it would be more open season for privatization. Now, none of this was discussed openly, but we know from some leaks from the Prime Minister's office that that was the plan. He never said the words privatization out loud because Canadians, I think, overall have a bit of a love affair with their post office.
And with their medical care compared to the United States.
Absolutely. And so we went into the last election and they started the cuts to door, and we're going to eliminate it. And what was interesting about that is we launched a ground campaign that involved communities. And we were able, essentially, all three of the major political parties in Canada shifted their positions during the election period, more favorable to us. And but it was really a different kind of work. We did things a little bit strategically different, perhaps, than we've done in the past. And part of that was not just realizing we're an insular union, just going on strike for ourselves, but in fact we have a responsibility to maintain the postal service for all Canadians and then engage them in that. And if you think about it, and this is a term, when I say brand, this is a term that drives postal workers crazy because they think it's a corporate term, but our brand is actually the face of the letter carrier at the door, or the clerk, or the rural mail carrier.
Like the United Parcel Service, the people that do the work is the face of your union.
They build up relationships over decades, right? And so there's a trust there. So in some communities, they would go and knock on doors and say, look, I'm your local letter carrier, and they would be joined by a local person saying, I'm a resident of this community, we're concerned about postal cuts. We were wondering what you have to say about it, and we're going to take your comments to our elected officials. Now, this completely turned around that notion of just going in and telling people to support you, but actually asking them. And from that question, you could see that, you could sort of see where people were coming from politically. I mean, some just totally supported us. Some people, were moderately supportive. Some people just, I don't care. And others were rather right-wing. But by that first question of asking people were engaged. Usually no one asks you what you think. They just tell you what to think. And through this, then we could meet people halfway. So, for example, let's take a conservative voter. They like the postal service, they like the door-to-door, but we can't afford it. I can't afford any more taxes and all this stuff. And so we would point out the post office in Canada is actually self-funded. But if they were to impose these super mailboxes in their neighborhoods, then it was going to be the responsibility of the municipal governments to clean the snow out, to take care of the garbage, to deal with the multitude of thefts which has happened in the locations where they've put them. So who's going to pay for that? And when a conservative starts thinking more taxes, they came on board. And it was true. They would have paid for these services that were being provided federally now under the umbrella of Canada Post, which they don't pay a dime for other than their postage stamps. So that's one example of the kind of outreach that happened. And then people would provide their data, and we'd be given simple asks. Would you do this for me? I'm just asking one simple thing. Would you phone this number and say this? Subsequently, and I would like to give you a document called Delivering Community Power, because it proposed a new and positive vision for Canada Post that could use new services like check-ins on seniors who want to remain in their homes. I mean, we've got thousands of people on the street every day. We're well adapted to do that. It really adds value to the...
How about a bank, as they have?
Well, of course, the Postal Bank is on the table. And of course, in these times of climate change, and the Post Office has the largest vehicle fleet and human resource network in Canada, if you want to start attacking climate change, Do it there. Put solar panels on post offices, use electric vehicles, put in electric charging stations. Also make the post office a community hub to provide other services and points of contact for people that sort of take us out in the malls and restore some community to our life, to our lives. And in some cases, people are asking for broadband internet with the internet monopolies have really made internet services in remote areas almost impossible or hugely expensive. And they've done this deliberately. You know, in cases where they, for example, they had cell phone towers that were working fine and delivering broadband, they took those out so that people had to pay a fortune, lay fiber optic and all this. But there are post offices everywhere. There are more post offices in Canada than there are Tim Hortons, which is our beloved coffee chain, like Starbucks or whatever you have in the States, or Dunkin' Donuts or whatever. So having twice the amount of actual Tim Hortons in the country blows people away, but it means we are located in communities everywhere and well served to bring community back. And to make it an access point to get other services and to get broadband internet and do postal banking. And on that postal banking front, I want to add, there's been a lot of resistance from, not surprisingly, from the banking sector in Canada. And yet we look around the world, postal banking's been a huge success everywhere it's done. And so I would say to that, for people who are supposedly motivated by competition and free competition and all this, why are they opposed to competing with a public service that could provide the service? Let people choose. Let the people choose. And I think this is, the people in Canada are clearly choosing that they want a postal bank. And our studies and research shows that if we were a postal bank, instantly, massive amounts of Canadians would switch to their savings to a postal bank, and I think it's up to about 30% who would think they would switch immediately or eventually switch. If we look at the case of Morocco, their postal bank is 8 years old. They have 70% market share. The World Bank wouldn't give them any money, told them it would be a disaster, nobody would be interested in it. They had to find the financing in their own company, and now they, or the country, and now they have 70% market share. So anybody that tells you that postal banking can't be a success and that people don't want to put their money in a public bank versus a shyster bank, I think is really deluding themselves and deluding the population.
Now, Amazon and Google and these other companies are hiring people. They're getting rid of retail stores using technology. And in the United States, some postal workers are delivering Amazon products. Is there a threat to Canadian postal workers and the public by the development of the gig economy and all these temporary workers being used by these companies?
Well, people still need stuff, right? And they order stuff now. So the nature of the mail has changed. If just a few short years ago, people are talking about it's the end of the mail system. You know, the internet's going to kill the mail. Well, no, it's only changed it. In fact, the only thing that's being killed are postal workers carrying all that extra work. I mean, it's not.
And you must have an increase of injuries and health and safety problems.
Oh, yeah. And it's something we need to wrap our minds around and deal with. But I think there's all kinds of ways that this can actually be good for the Postal Service. First of all, these companies lack the infrastructure that the public post office had. They only invest in places where they make money. The Postal Service serves everybody. So it doesn't matter you live in the very north or the very south or, you know, in rural areas, you're entitled to a certain level of service that UPS and FedEx and these companies will never provide because they're completely profit motivated. But our argument is the other services that we can do that actually expand the value of Canada Post and make it meaningful for communities, and so it can be a win-win-win situation. I do think that we could get more creative with warehousing, for example. Over the past several years, as you know, under just-in-time delivery systems, sort of warehouses have been collapsed and things are in constant movement. But I want to take the example of Belgium, which I think is really amazing, and this project started in Antwerp, but is now expanded across the country. So urban cities have congestion problems and CO2 production problems, right? So what they decided is they would do an experiment in Antwerp and say only the Postal Service can deliver in the city. So all those outside providers have to deliver their goods to the edge of the city, transfer them to a postal truck where they get delivered. Now, what does this do? It reduces congestion and it reduces CO2. Well, things that cities want. You don't have 20 trucks rolling around with 20 different parcels. You have one truck with 20 parcels. And so I think these are sort of innovative and creative solutions that we should explore more. In fact, we intend on hopefully meeting with some of the cities in Canada and see if they would consider discussing some kind of pilots related on this. And incidentally, I wanted to add and put a plug for one of our members, Juliana Fumagalli, who was a rank and file postal worker who was just elected mayor of North Montreal. So we have some real openings here.
And the gridlock in the Bay Area, San Francisco, all these trucks and vehicles delivering and Uber, and it's creating an impossible situation for working people, regular people to get around.
Yeah, I mean, there's a presumption, I think, in Western societies that more is better, and maybe how is better. How we relate, how we work together, how we cooperate should be given precedence over how many widgets you can produce and how fast they can be consumed, because capitalism's not working for workers. It just isn't. I mean, we have some people, especially with this implosion or this increase in parcels, that are working way too much, like forced overtime, working way too hard, way too much. Well, you have other people who can't get any work. And so why wouldn't we want to equalize that for society? And if we go back, I remember as a child, reading Popular Mechanics and all this stuff, the future was going to be like the Jetsons, right? They're going to have robots, and we had all this leisure time. We'd only have to work a couple hours a day. But that's not what's happened. What's happened is we've generated a substantial amount of billionaires while people struggle to survive in their communities and fight for precarious work.